check, check, check.
we start? Okay. Hi, good afternoon, colleagues. We welcome to the Track 2 event on accelerating sustainable urban transport in Asia and Pacific. We've been following the transport theme today, and we look forward to now looking at what could be done in terms of the number of actions, policies, programs that countries have designed. So what needs to be done, or what could be done, or what has been learned so far that would help us scale up to address the different challenges that we face on front of transport, plus the implications that it has on the environment. So to discuss some of these, we have put together a panel which will be soon presenting the views across a range of spectrum of views from different stakeholders. But before we get to that, I would like to invite Ms. Catherine Luger. She is the Chief Transport Division at ESCAP, to set the context, to give frame the discussions that would be followed by the panel. Catherine, the floor is yours.
Distinguished participants, ladies and gentlemen, both here in person in Johor Bahru and online, good afternoon. Welcome to the thematic track event on accelerating sustainable urban transport in Asia and the Pacific. It's a great pleasure to co-host this event with our long-term partners from the UN Environment Programme. And most importantly, I'd like to warmly thank the speakers from our member states today for sharing their ambitions, plans, and experiences, as well as welcome the representatives of the private sector. A big thank you also goes to the UNFCCC for providing this excellent platform, and to our hosts, the governments of Malaysia and the city of Johor Bahru. Transport infrastructure and services play a key role in connecting people to places where they work, live, play, and learn. However, only around half of the world's urban population has convenient access to public transport services. And if we focus on Asian cities, the proportion becomes even more challenging, with only around 1/3 of urban population having convenient public transport access. And there's no end in sight. More than 2.3 billion people will live in urban areas in the Asia-Pacific region by 2030. And this number increases to nearly 3.5 billion in 2050. The number of Asian megacities is also expected to increase by 50% between 2018 and 2030. So it will increase by 50% in just 12 years. It is certainly true that considering this rapid urbanization, cities are facing challenges to expand public transport systems and improve the efficiency of their services to meet this increasing transport demand. Unfortunately, the carbon emissions trajectory that comes with such demand growth is clearly unsustainable, and it is putting the region off track to meet its decarbonization objectives and commitments. Now, ESCAP and its partners are supporting member states in their decarbonization journey by providing a platform to enhance regional collaboration between countries, by enabling best practice knowledge sharing and capacity building to accelerate the implementation of low-carbon transport policies, which we all need. This initiative is called the Regional Cooperation Mechanism on Low-Carbon Transport, and a regional meeting was held right here yesterday, engaging around 20 ESCAP member states. I would like to share with you a very brief summary of the discussion. The meeting was very much focused on transitioning from commitments to action, and 3 priorities to take action on the low-carbon pathway were discussed. The first one, not surprisingly, was actually how to develop implementation plans for the transport targets, mitigation timelines, and develop nationally determined contributions, or translate nationally determined contributions into action plans, and also develop the long-term low-emission development strategies in case countries have them. The second topic is a little more specific, is around green transport corridors, which specifically addresses decarbonization in the freight business. And then last but not least, since none of these transitions come for free, a big priority is climate finance for low carbon transport. I'm very much looking forward to hear from our panel today what can be done in this context. Now let's talk about cities in particular. A low-hanging fruit for cities to pivot to low carbon transport is the transition to electric mobility. And there's two key elements of this transition. The first one is the expansion of urban rail networks. Rail carries 40 times more passengers per square meter and emits almost 80% less greenhouse gases compared to cars. And the second element is obviously the promotion of electric buses and electric cars. In this field, ESCAP has extended capacity building support to countries as well through an initiative called the Asia-Pacific Initiative on Electric Mobility. It's already been joined by 19 member states, and we have significant demand from more member states to provide support for the building of national electric vehicle ecosystems. So this initiative is enhancing regional collaboration between countries, strengthening the capacity to formulate national policies, and most importantly, strengthening strategies and action plans to accelerate the transition towards electric mobility, especially in public transport fleets. It is also focusing on enhancing multi-sectoral collaboration among energy, transport, finance, urban planning, housing, and other sectors, without which this transition will not become a reality. Under this program, national EV policy frameworks have already been deployed for 5 member states, and another 5 are forthcoming. I would also like to share that today we held 2 events earlier this day that covered the topic of transforming low-carbon transport commitments to action. Again, the theme is very consistent, and specifically focusing on zero-emission trucks to decarbonize the road freight sector. And of course, downtown transition or downtown transportation of freight in cities is also a challenge. As a next step, key findings from this and other sessions will be carried forward to COP28 in Dubai to inform among others, the first global stocktake, but also importantly, to put transport on the global agenda and on the global platform. So I'm very happy and pleased that we are able to hold this event today, because it is certainly relevant and timely. In closing, I would like to thank all our speakers for their contributions, and I wish us all a very productive discussion, which I am very much looking forward to. Thank you.
Thank you, Catherine, for setting the scene, and I think highlighting one of the important parts in terms of the share of population that's going to be in urban areas and one of the key services of urban mobility and its implication in terms of sustainability. What we'll do is we'll quickly jump into the next session, which is basically a session where we invite our panelists. So may I request our panelists to please join me here on the podium. Mr. Eli, he's an energy planner from Tonga. So very well connected to in terms of looking at the consequences of energy on transport sector and the implications at that cross-section. Mr. Hasrul Rosli, he's the head of the sustainability at Prasarna, Malaysia, Behrad. So a public service provider which operates the transport systems. Then Mr. Bowen Wang, he's a transport specialist from World Bank. So at the cross-section of looking at transport issues plus looking at the financing aspects. And then finally, I don't know if you can put, yes, our speaker, our panelist, Ms. Yelena, who's the General Manager of Sustainability from DHL. She is virtually with us today. So we have the panel to start with. I forgot one thing. I kind of assume that I'm a celebrity, so everyone knows me, so let me introduce myself as well. I am Sudhir Sharma. I am with UNEP. UNEP and ESCAP has been working on transport related issues for long. So from UNEP sides also, I welcome you all. Now, as Catherine mentioned, one of the key points that we basically want to take out of this is to look at what could we take from these discussions and the different discussions on transport that has happened to COP28. So feed into that process. The key outcomes that we would be focusing on and would like our panelists to kind of throw light is in terms of looking at what are those critical policies, regulations that need to be put in place to provide the transformation to happen. What are the kind of solutions which have been tested and can be scaled up? What is the level of investments that are required to enable this transformation, because it's a very short-term transformation with a huge amount of investment required, as well as what are the best practices or lessons that they have come across that they think would be useful in terms of sharing with the audience here, as well as taking forward as an input to COP28. So without much further ado, let me kind of move to the first set of questions. I'm a bit technology challenged right now. So let me first start in terms of asking, maybe I can start with Mr. Hasrul Rosli. What are the kind of, since you have been in this field of providing rapid transport systems, what is the kind of investment and support that are needed that would enable higher ambition in terms of both providing the mobility plus also ensuring that it is sustainable and addresses climate change? If you could focus on in terms of looking at what are the solutions, how to kind of scale up these ambitions, and what are the key players that are critical in cooperating with to implement these solutions. Over to you, Mr.
Thank you, Steve. I think, first, I would love to give, in terms of context, where Malaysia is right now. In terms of transportation industry sectors, we are, in terms of emissions, we are the second largest emitters in Malaysia, right behind the energy sector. So the key takeaways in terms of what would be the key initiative in terms of how do we scaling up the transportation and decarbonizations. So I would love to give a bit of how Prasarana Malaysia Berhad has experienced. We have this ambition of going electrification of our full bus fleets. As is right now, we have a mixed fleets of ICE buses and also electric buses. So when we do have this rollout plan, we have been met by challenges in terms of infrastructures. So the infrastructures in terms of the grid supply is not there. So we are limited by that. So in terms of how do we want to scale up, we got to have a cohesive plannings and collaboration with all the players in terms of the utility providers, the authorities, the local authorities, where we would love to have how, in terms of to get it done across and in terms of the process, because it will take us like up to 2037 in terms of Prasarana to replace all of our diesel buses to go full EV. So that's how long it will take for us in terms of context for Malaysia. So the investment that needed is quite huge, and we believe that for us, being a government-owned company, we will be the catalyst in terms of creating the ecosystems, especially on the operational and maintenance. So we will have to have key local players to support us in terms of the supply chain, the capacity buildings. So those must be in place and to support us in terms of this. So that will be a bit of a taste of what Prasarana is doing right now for Malaysia. Yes.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Hasrul. So essentially, you look at what is key is that it's a coordination among different actors, both within the government and as well as the private sector. May I now request you, Bowen, From your perspective, sitting in the World Bank, looking at providing financing to development and other aspects, how do you see that prospect of kind of investments that are needed, and how could that be scaled up?
Thank you very much. Before I start, let me just thank you very much for UNESCAP and the UNEP organizing all the sessions. And I think it's very much needed focused discussion on decarbonization of the transportation sector. Just for the audience, my name is Bowen Wan. I'm a transport specialist from the World Bank based in Singapore. I'm leading several transport lending and technical assistance engagement across Southeast Asia and the Pacific. It's a pleasure being here today with you. I think before we get into the investment part, I want to lay out a little bit of the implementation challenge that we see across our client countries, which are largely, middle-income countries and low-income countries. I have a slightly different view from what Dr. Christine just mentioned. I do not think transition to EV is a low-hanging fruit by any means. I think it's rather challenging for the several reasons. Well, typically we consider the EV transition as a supply issue, right? You change all the buses or fleets on the street from ICE vehicles to electric vehicles, and of course associated charging infrastructure, etc. All of those are a matter of financing supply, technology supply, fleet supply, right? But I think a more challenging issue is really on the demand side. Because let's say tomorrow we change all the buses in Southeast Asia to e-buses. But if you still have only 10% of mode share, if you still have only 10% passengers decide to take buses, that does not really translate your supply of EVs into emission reduction. Because the massive amount of ICE vehicle-based motorbikes and tuk-tuks will still be on the street. So the real challenge is really how you combine these two together, right? You supply the electric vehicles as a technology, but in the meanwhile have very stringent policy to move the demand, mobility demand from private modes to public and mass transit. And of course, in the private mode segment, electrification needs to take place at the same time. Let's say Singapore, where I live. I think it's a fantastic example. I asked this question to the Land Transport Authority of Singapore. How did you do this? You have more than 90% of mode share on public transport. But maybe 60, 70 years ago, you faced the same problem. Everybody was riding bicycles. How did you change that? And the answer I got, I think, is very inspiring, which is whenever the government introduces a mega infrastructure project investment, right, let's say building your MRTs or building your network of buses, when you launch it at the same time, without any delay, you must introduce very stringent policy to trigger behavior change. That means wherever the bus network services covers, private modes should be limited or banned altogether. Right? Yes, for the first 2 or 3 years, you will have pushbacks from stakeholders. But once they start to try the bus services and there is no more issue of congestion, delayed services and everything, you will see demand shift, and that helps with the financial viability of all this investment, and you kind of move the demand altogether. I think that's a very important lesson for our countries. It's not only a matter of putting money and supply the technology, it's really a structural change of the demand. That's the first point. The second point on the financing side, I think the bank, and along with our MDB sisters, we're all here together and providing finance for transport project that is green. If you look at our portfolio, not only today, 6, 7, 8 years ago, in urban space, all our investment has been on public transport, metros. So it's all green already. So it's a story of past. We're doing this for quite a long time already. The issue, in my view, is really the scale. Because whenever our client countries approach to the World Bank, we're talking about BRTs, buses, one-line corridor. Now, we all know that one BRT corridor will not solve any problem for a city, right? What will solve a problem is, for instance, a metro. But metro is very expensive. Many of our client countries will not even raise this demand to us. Right? We're talking about investment at the billion scales and implementation time range of 10 years. So let's say even if tomorrow we're ready to provide billions of dollars to a country like Vietnam, for instance, and by the time the project completes, we're in 2040. So by mid-century, we'll probably only be able to pull off 2 metro lines, right? So that's the urgency we're facing, and that's the issue where we're demand either the client countries can come to us with all this issue with debt sustainability and asking for ADB, World Bank, everyone to give them multi-billion dollars in credit or loan to construct metros. Right? I don't think that is the demand landscape at this moment. So in summary, I really think either it's on the ridership or it's on financing side, more issues really on the demand rather than supply financing. Let me stop here. Thank you.
Thanks. Thanks so much, Bowen, for that. So essentially, what is needed, what you're saying is to create a viability or sustainable viability of public transport system if we have to move the population, and that's the demand to look at. Now, Ms. Yelena, you are with a private sector company. Your company DHL is carrying out a lot of efforts in achieving sustainability. So from your perspective, what are the kind of things that DHL has done which you think could be scaled up? And where do you think the investments in complementary infrastructure could come from other partners which would help companies like DHL to rapidly move towards sustainability? Thanks. Over to you.
Discuss issues that I think a lot of organizations, including the private sector, is facing. At DHL, we have a strong sustainability agenda. We operate across 200 countries, and we are governed by the EU regulatory framework when it comes to decarbonization. So obviously, the strong agenda is there, and compliance also has to, follow the regulatory framework as well. Our decarbonization strategy includes several areas. One is use of sustainable fuels, of which we have already transformed part of our aviation business into using the sustainable aviation fuel. This is the biggest contract that any company in the world has signed recently. So we believe that we are a leader in sustainable aviation fuel. That's one thing. Second thing, 60% of our fleet will be by 2030 electric across the globe, which is one of the parts of how we see sustainability ahead of the time, including that it will contribute to our targets called science-based targets that we are committed to. Now, I've been listening to a lot of, public policies and decision makers when deciding on how this electrification will look like, but I have to emphasize several things that are very challenging for any of the organization and specifically for the logistics sector. One is that just having electric vehicles on the road will not sort out greenhouse gas emission in the atmosphere. Electric vehicle will never offset any of the greenhouse gas emissions. It's the renewable electricity that is powering that fleet, and those trucks is doing the decarbonization. And we know that in Asia, renewable electricity or renewable energy is just a small portion of the national power grids. For example, in Thailand, we have only 15% of the renewable energy in the energy mix in the national power grid. In Indonesia, that is about 10%. In Bangladesh, that is 2%. So having more electric vehicles will not sort out a problem around the greenhouse gas emission and the reduction. We need to transform our power sector to deliver more sustainable energy. That is one thing. And that is maybe the most crucial one, which will result in lower emissions. The second one is heavy electrification without proper plan of the infrastructure will not enable environment where electric vehicles will actually be on the road. Why I'm saying that? Because the infrastructure is primarily built for fossil fuels, not for renewable energy sources. And so when you have a very large number of electric vehicles, powering at the same time, causing a peak, it will blow the energy grid. Somewhere will outage happen. We have experienced that, and we know that even larger electrification will have more this kind of causes. So the governments would really need to focus on scaling up the public infrastructure to make sure that the electrification plans that are placed in public policies are followed with the infrastructure, because it's not going to work if you have public policies and you don't have a sufficient infrastructure. That is the second thing. The third thing is that a lot of these investments, when you are bringing assets such as electric vehicle, and due to insufficient public infrastructure, private sector is forced to invest in that infrastructure as well. This, for example, anything that is on the distribution part, such as substations, circuits, transformers, this is everything that is increasing that kind of investment because it's inexisting on the ground, and most importantly, it's not existing on the corridors that the logistics sector is transporting the goods from point A to point B. So if we want to see public policies that are resulting with the good outcomes, these three aspects must be looked into deeper. One, massive access to electricity, which is offsetting carbon footprint from the transportation. Two, infrastructure that is sufficient to hold the peaks of the energy demand. And three, building that infrastructure along meaningful corridors that the logistic companies are traveling to transport those goods from point A to point B. And here I will stop because I'm sure that you have more questions for me later on.
Yes, thank you so much, Yelena. That was quite interesting in terms of essentially what is required if you're looking at e-mobility is the infrastructure to support that transformation, including renewable energy, and that has its own challenge of integrating it into the grid. I think that brings us to a very kind of a good point of requesting Elia yourself. You come from the government, you are an energy planner, and you definitely would have appreciated what Yelena was saying. So for you, maybe I can combine this two set of questions together, knowing that you would have to leave us soon. Is one in terms of how do you see more ambitious climate action in Asia-Pacific region could be achieved that drives sustainable transport? And second, the question that I asked the other panelists in terms of what would that mean in terms of investments, and what are the ways in which these investments could be scaled up, and what are the solutions that could help? And especially you come from Tonga, which is an island country which has even a greater challenge of looking at this grid-related infrastructure. So over to you.
Thank you, moderator. I'd like to acknowledge UNESCO and UNFCCC for setting out this great platform for this kind of discussion. Well, from a Pacific perspective, I think, the Kingdom of Tonga, like many small island developing states, they are heavily dependent on the imported fossil fuels to meet its current energy needs, especially for transportation. Gasoline-based fuel imports present a financial burden to the local economy, exposing the country to large fluctuations in global oil prices and contribute significantly to Tonga's GHG emissions. As a result of this, the government is actively working to reduce its fuel imports and GHG emissions by transitioning toward a more sustainable and resilient transportation system. Now, coming into urban sustainable transport, I think from Tonga experience, infrastructure scale up and upgrade is very pivotal in this transition. Infrastructure projects can be expensive and it can take time. So, but be that as it may, I think transport is challenging enough because of the behavioral aspects that plays a huge part in this transition. I think it is also paramount to have pilot and demonstration projects, in terms of transitioning to EV, such as EPAS, for example. That's one of the main priorities that's more common in the Pacific region, because it really impacts on the public transport when it comes to urban transportation system, for example. Anyways, another good demonstration opportunity would be next year. I think the Tonga government will be hosting the Pacific Leaders Forum. I think there will be a very good opportunity to demonstrate this kind of pilot projects, so that people see it like more hands-on with this kind of technology, and you'll make the transition more effective when the infrastructure and everything else comes into place, including the policy. Also, I think affordability is a key element in accelerating these low carbon transport strategies. Most Pacific states at the moment, if we switch to EV, only a fair amount, or very few amount of people can afford EV if we switch. So therefore, policies for accessible EVs and charging is very pivotal in this transition as well, as they are there to make a variety of EVs accessible in the kingdom, in the country, along with convenient, charging infrastructure. Affordable EVs and charging policies can aim to bring down these costs so that the market can grow. Policies that target EV charging as a grid asset can aim to manage new electrical load so that the electrical grid becomes more resilient as opposed to less resilient. And indirectly, I think increasing the climate resilience in the power sector is very important. If you guys may have not known that Tonga literally started last year with a bang, hence the volcanic eruption. And that up to now, we're still experiencing some power cutouts or blackouts. That's because of the volcanic ash. It has like some kind of metallic elements that can cause short circuit in the main grid. And it wasn't picked up back then because it took some time for the corrosive reaction to happen, and now we're experiencing it. We did upgrade our network, expecting a tsunami and a tropical cyclone. We did not expect a volcanic eruption. So that's the kind of experience of the idea behind increasing this kind of resilience in the power sector if we are transitioning into electrical vehicle as well. The kind of investment and the support, I think I've already briefly mentioned before. There were some key takeaways from the regional cooperation mechanism on low carbon transport meeting we had yesterday. I think it's from a Pacific state's perspective, having an easier access to some kind of a fund directory for decarbonizing transport sector alone. I think that's very key in this. And as discussed in the regional cooperation mechanism on low carbon transport meeting yesterday, this kind of transition is fairly new to the Pacific. I think only Fiji have already exercised the hybrid, and the EPAS had already had those kind of initiative in the country. But so technology and knowledge transfer is key for this kind of transition in the Pacific. Of course, the regulatory framework set out. Technical assistance is very much needed in that area. For Tonga, we're finalizing a policy framework on how to adopt EV. And fortunately, we already have the Pacific Center for Renewable Energy and Energy Efficiency set up a regional e-mobility program that would assist the rest of the Pacific states when they come into terms with this kind of transition. So you don't have to start from scratch, is what I'm trying to say. Also, increasing this kind of sub-regional workshop and regional workshop and capacity building programs for low carbon transport it's also like it would be good to be mindful like when we talk about Pacific and the Asia region, because when you split those two, like it can then really reflect what's really happening on the national level. The context is very different between these regions in terms of population, in terms of geographical barriers and other stuff like that. So it is very important to keep that in mind, and with hosting such a workshop like this, it's also good to keep regional and sub-regional capacity program alive as well. And also enhancing, lastly, enhancing the cooperation between the transport and the energy or climate change agencies at a national and a regional level. I haven't met anyone in my years of experience that's saying they're from the energy and they also have the transport division there. They're always housed in different ministries or different government agencies. So that's a huge was a huge takeaway from yesterday's event as well, to note down that whenever you have like this kind of forum or this discussion, it's always good to have like representatives from the two, because they are usually housed in different agencies as well. I think that's all I can say for now. Thank you.
Thank you. Thanks for those insights. And yes, I think the circumstances for island countries is very, very different. And the fact that it is not only in terms of sustainable, there is the word resilience which needs to be brought in of the infrastructure, that becomes much more relevant for these countries. Just before I let you go, in terms of, so there are a lot of efforts going on. UNEP is doing some interventions, other UN agencies, I'm sure World Bank and ADB. One of the things that we've noticed that there is a lack of structured public transport in many of the countries there. And how do you see that issue? I mean, how could that be addressed? Because we're talking about also not just moving to electric mobility as a technology change, but also to enhance the public infrastructure. So any thoughts? I know I'm putting you on a spot here. You come from a planning side of energy. But since you said that, and I agree with you, that we need to have integration across energy and transport. Any thoughts on that you could like to share with us? Thanks.
Thank you. I think, as I briefly mentioned before, when it comes to public transport, is that what you're referring to, right? The main challenge is the infrastructure. Let's say, for example, workers don't usually use the bus back at home because it's not really consistent, the timing. Why it's not consistent? Because there's no bus stop, like a station, like in every 200 meters or so. It's those kind of barriers, those barriers that kind of hinders the if we switch to e-bus. Like, then how many people are going to use it? But what we're going to use it on? The infrastructure is not there. And I think it's also used that the key players to enhance this kind of cooperation and support would be the policymakers at first. So that's usually the ministry responsible for transport or climate change or energy. And I think also the private sectors, they're the very driving force behind in this transition to make it happen, because they're the implementers, or so to speak, in this kind of transition. So yeah, that's what I can say for now.
Can I pick up on that? I think it's a very critical issue that you mentioned. Electric or non-electric, right? We need a functional public transport network to begin with. And that is a pure transport territory, urban, right? In many places, well, for island countries certainly, right, it's issue of remoteness, right? And even most typical. I have a project in Vanuatu, which I was there 2 weeks ago. You will have a core bus network along the coastal roads, but it doesn't really reach to the far remote villages, right? And the same issue in bigger cities in Asia. Well, there the issue is really narrow street, right? They were not built for buses, and plus with all the motorbikes crowding in the road, so you'll have a bus stuck in the road all the time and not on time. The network coverage doesn't solve the first last mile connectivity issue, right? So from our experience, it's really important to convey the message to the government before you commit putting money on electrification conversion for bus, making sure your bus network work, or giving the public an impression that, yes, when we do the electrification, we're going to fix the bus network coverage at the same time, right? So that will give them confidence, then later on translating to ridership and box revenue. The second point I want to really kind of relate it to your point on affordability. I think this is very critical. For this overall e-mobility transition, I think the Asia's context, developing Asia's context is often shadowed by OECD China, right? Globally, when you talk about e-mobility transition, you think about where you're going to charge your Tesla, right? Or your BYD. But that is not at all the issue in Southeast Asia. Because if you look at the public income level, right, look at affordability, 90% of private vehicles in Southeast Asia are motorbikes. Because that's what the income sits, right? And even assuming the same economic growth will continue in countries like Vietnam or Indonesia, etc., that motorization rate increase among the four-wheeler segments, it's going to be moderate. So at the moment, for instance, in Vietnam, you have a motorization rate of roughly 20 to 23 cars per 1,000 population. Right? That will probably reach to around 50 or 60 by 2040, 2050. But then the question is, as a government, do you want to use a lot of money to put together a charging infrastructure network for cars that are only used at top around 40 or 50 people across 1,000 population? I do not necessarily think that's a smart investment strategy. Right? If you want to go for electrification and cover the vast majority of your population and link that with your income level and projections, you may want to start with two-wheelers and to focus more on swapping stations, so on and so forth. So all of those critical affordability-related discussion must be embedded in the e-mobility transition discussion. We cannot afford to have this e-mobility as an overall kind of chapeau. You really have to look into sub-segment. You really have to look into what's the actual situation in the country. Thank you.
Thanks for that answer. Yeah, sure.
May I also take part?
Yes, Yelena, please.
I think while the governments are doing their planning around urban transportation and massive transportation, I think that private sector shouldn't be forgotten here. Private sector contributes to nationally determined contributions of the countries. We have our targets. We are committed to science-based targets that we must achieve. And when it comes to electrification, and I think that we are also talking about sustainability, decarbonization, there will be no decarbonization and private sector will not achieve their targets if the energy sector doesn't transform their supplies. That means that they need to diversify energy sources and deliver more sustainable fuels on the market. From the perspective of global greenhouse gas emissions, energy sector is 80% of the total emissions. Road transportation is 16% of the total emissions, and maritime industry is 2% of the total emissions. So we are not able to transform our operation and move towards low carbon economies if the energy sector doesn't transform their operations and offer more sustainable fuels and greener electricity in the national power grids. That's the whole point of decarbonization. Public infrastructure must follow these requirements. And if the governments and countries were to achieve their nationally determined contributions and everything along that goes with it, which I would believe my colleagues in the World Bank and UNFCCC would know much better what is also resulting and the outcomes of that is to build and scale up infrastructure that will accept more renewable energy and will be distributed to commercial, residential, and governmental public sector so that we have a massive access to renewable energy. And that will then contribute to a lot of different sustainable development goals, create green jobs, give more opportunities to bring, a lot of people from the extreme poverty and enable a lot of different possibilities as well, along with the clean air and greater opportunities for life. So private sector shouldn't be forgotten in, when the governments are drafting public policies. We are by large contributing to nationally determined contributions as well. In often cases, we are actually much faster than the public sector is. For example, we already have electric vehicles on the road of transport. By our plan, we are doubling our fleet every year, and we are financing our infrastructure that should support that electrification of the fleet. And that's also because it's not only about our operation and our targets. When we decarbonize our operation, we are also contributing to decarbonization of our customers. And this is the whole point, that we work together so that together we lower our carbon footprints. And as a result, the countries would also have a lower carbon footprint, but we need more support from the governments to follow the infrastructure that the private sector needs.
Yeah, thanks, Yelena. I think one of the common themes from both what you mentioned and what has been mentioned about renewable energy is, and Bowen you mentioned, is essentially both the infrastructure. When we talk about mobility, it might look at buses, cycles, and other things, but the main part is there is a large infrastructure which facilitates that mobility. And we can't talk about mobility without that infrastructure and how to put that infrastructure, which might be also a developmental challenge, not purely an environmental or sustainability challenge. The other aspect in most of the countries is affordability, which is the point that you're bringing on. Which basically makes it even more challenging, because if you're moving to public transport, if it's not affordable, possibly you might not get the demand. So how do you put that now in place? So I think that gives us a very good kind of a segue into the next set of questions that I like to put to the panelists. And if I may request, if you can limit yourself to 3 to 4 minutes, we are kind of running out of time now. So what are the key policy enablers that can create this the space for accelerating actions when I talk to you, Mr. Hassoli, you're already part of the government. Your financing are coming from that, but I'm sure there are still certain set of policies which could help. You mentioned that there is a kind of a infrastructure or a value chain that needs to be put in place for your organization to deliver. So what are those policies that needs to be put in place that could help your organization in speed up this transformation? Over to you, please.
Okay, let me speak a bit in terms of the experience in Malaysia. I think, first of all, public transportation itself, without the electrification, is already a low carbon mobility solution. So getting people to leave their cars at home and go and take the public transportation services is already helping in terms of decarbonization efforts. So perhaps the issues that we face in Malaysia is a bit of in terms of the effect on economy, because right now we still have this national automotive policy which actually driving our industries of manufacturing of private cars. And we can see in terms of the data of congestion that we see in the city centers of Kuala Lumpur, pre-pandemic and post-pandemic, people actually buy more cars. So, and on the other hand, we have this national transport policy which talks about increasing the modal share of public transport. So that in the way is conflicting in the nature. So how do we actually get those things in line and perhaps get the middle point in between, how do we go about end of this? So the electrification concern will be maybe the last part of all these discussions about these policies, and perhaps the emphasis of getting how we can actually get the planning, for example, perhaps the urban setting itself. When we design the cities, it has to be part, public transportation must be part, and the first key elements that you have to took place when you design the cities. And not, for example, like what we have in Kuala Lumpur is a bit much of an afterthought, our public transportation there. So the public transportation in Kuala Lumpur builds around the cities, not to become like the center of it. So this is pretty much what we are missing in terms of supporting the SDG Goal 11, for example. So that's perhaps what we need in terms of the political will of the governments. to do certain policies, and perhaps go a bit of stringence up to, example, like imposing congestion charges to the cities, perhaps started to introduce low emission zones. So those are the key things, elements that we are still missing here in Malaysia. And up and something like we don't have yet anything about carbon tax policies. So those are things that we want to see more, for example, in Malaysia, enable for us to make the public transportation become more enticing for the users, for the rakyat. So that will be my point for you.
Thank you so much. Turning to you, Bowen, you did already introduce one policy where you said the government of Singapore restricted or put a tax, heavy tax on transport, which, as was just now mentioned, might not be politically very palatable. But from a World Bank perspective, when you're looking at these loans in transport infrastructure creating mobility, what are the specific areas where you see the challenges which you you anticipate could actually make these projects unviable and therefore the investments unviable? So what are those things that would be needed to change to help this transformation happen? Thanks.
Thank you very much. Well, we do a lot of try to do a lot of PPP on bus segment, and whenever we talk with private investors, their first issue is ridership risk, right? Ridership risk. So, because all your business model basically building from there, right? What's your projected ridership, and then fare box revenue plus subsidy, everything. So ridership is really the fundamental element. So that's linked to one of the key policy I think we should strongly push across our client countries. That is, in terms of transport, you really cannot go incrementally. You cannot go like, let's build one road here, one corridor here, and let's see how much money we left, right? Instead, I think the better approach will be go ambitious, right? You borrow or you mobilize multi-billion dollars at one go, you invest at the network, as a network, right? So collectively, the entire network in terms of infrastructure coverage and quality elevate in a period of 6 to 10 years. Let's say you build 8 BRT lines at the same time, or you build 3 metro lines at the same time. Yes, that will stretch your debt capacity upfront, but that will yield very different outcome, right? Because immediately the whole network, in terms of service capacity, will be able to convert the demand, right? That's the first point. So that's a mindset change that government need to consider, right? From incremental look into your annual debt ratio to something more strategic, right? The second point is really on ICE vehicle management. I think we keep talking about EV, how do we supply more EVs, but the issues in a lot of our countries is really ICE vehicle management, particularly in countries who are where they are very exposed to second-hand vehicle importation. Right, that's the sort of Cambodia, Laos, Myanmar, and certainly all across Pacific. Right, in Thailand and Vietnam, they banned second-hand vehicle importation. I think that should be the right way for everyone else, because the issue is OECD and US, they're going to phase out their ICE vehicle, right? And all those vehicles, we know they're going to flood into all those emerging markets at a very cheap price. Right, so if you allow that to happen, and we know there hasn't been a second-hand EV market there, right? So essentially, you're asking your consumers to choose between super expensive Tesla and BYD versus very, very, very cheap, even cheaper than today, SCE second-hand vehicles. Then it doesn't matter how this cost parity is reaching at a global level between new ICE vehicle and a new electric vehicle. It does not penetrate down to emerging market in Asia. Right, so unless you ban that, or you put that externality cost onto the purchasing price, I'm not talking about TCO, purchasing price of the vehicles of ICE, the EV penetration will not fly, simply put. We did the calculations, and that cost difference, purchasing cost difference between second-hand ICE vehicle and new EVs are huge, huge. So I think that's the second. The last point, key policy levers, if I were to raise, I think it's really on this issue of TOD, the transit-oriented development. We're focusing on city in this session. I think largely, well, in the transport sector, we have this avoid, improve, shift strategy, right, for decarbonization overall. We are focusing very much on shifting, improving, right? You move people from private modes to public modes, or you you improve energy efficiency of vehicles from ICE vehicles to EVs. But this avoid matter is always neglected, right? How do you reduce mobility demand altogether, right? How can every city become like Singapore, where you build a metro here, and immediately in walking distance, you have mall, you have all the life amenities, and you have your residential area net across, next to it. Right, and I think that's a lot for our urban planners to consider, right? So, frankly speaking, I think even in Asia, we've missed the boat for your first-tier cities, right? The Jakarta, the Ho Chi Minh is already there, right? It's very difficult, and land press doesn't really allow you to make any fundamental change. But looking into your secondary and third level cities, who are going to be modal urbanized very quickly, and there you still have a fundamental role to play in terms of land use, right? Land use mixture, plan all your commercial and residential development along your transportation lines. I think that's absolutely critical. Thank you.
Thank you so much. So you bring in another part of it in terms of integration. So when we're looking at mobility, not just the infrastructure, in urban mobility, it is also how do you integrate the planning of urban development and mobility within it is key to the avoid part of the reducing the demand on mobility. Thank you so much for that. So Yelena, you mentioned, yes, private sector is key. That's where the investments happen, that's where the action happens. So here's your chance now to tell us about what are the policies that would help private sector in making these investments and also kind of facilitating these changes or to transform to low or zero carbon mobility. Over to you.
Yeah. So I don't know if I mentioned at the beginning, DHL as a group is investing 7 billion euros into sustainability by 2030. Majority of these investments will flow into sustainable fuels and electrification of our fleet as well. So to support those investments, I think public sector should enable better environment for the upgrades of the infrastructure when it comes to road transportation, and also some of the markets, specifically here in Asia, should also look into, more sustainable fuels being available at the market-ready sustainable fuels. Why I'm saying this, because about 6,000 companies across the globe, and majority of them would have also operations here in Asia, have their science-based targets that they are committed to, and we are obliged, and it's mandatory for us to achieve them. This is contributing to the country's carbon footprints reductions as well. So public policies should focus on the infrastructure, because that's also their primarily business, to build the infrastructure that can serve businesses in their countries. For logistic companies, that is around the power grids and upgrading the power grids for electrification and enabling more sustainable energy, renewable energy injected into the national power grid that would be distributed through the infrastructure to facilities and fleet hubs. So that would be our main challenge that we are facing across Asia in general. So not enough available sustainable fuels, so biofuels, low carbon fuels, and future fuels as well, such as hydrogen, that can also be converted into electricity that could serve us and companies like us in terms of electrification by large. Ability on bringing in also advanced technology to the countries where these technologies are not market ready in some markets, they are subject to imports, and these imports also are subject to custom tariffs. So all that is increasing already high investments into electrification. I don't know if the audience is aware, but electric vehicles could be 3-4 times more expensive than the typical diesel truck. So, and we're still doing that because we believe in sustainability and we want to contribute to environmental protection. Our customer also recognize that, and so in collaboration with that, we bring these decisions, although in some markets the environment is not supportive to this kind. But nevertheless, we will not stop delivering sustainable solution for our customers. So I think a better collaboration in between the needs of the private sector from the demand side and public sector who is a decision maker and can create these environments along the supply chain and supply industry players in terms of diversifying energy supplies on the market is a crucial one if we are to achieve 2030 agenda and deliver the targets that everybody set up front and promised to do so. So I believe that the infrastructure is probably the crucial issue that the private sector is facing with.
Thank you, Jelena. So coming back to you, Elia, what would be your thought from a perspective, because you bring a very different perspective to other countries that are here, would be in terms of what are the key policy areas where your government is working or where you think would be very helpful to address this transformation? Thanks.
Thank you. I think from a planner's perspective and my experience within the government of Tonga, as I mentioned before, because we are very new to this kind of transition or adopting this e-mobility and sustainable transport strategy. Based on what we've developed with, I think right now we're finalizing setting out the regulatory framework or the policy framework, for Tonga when adopting these EVs, for example. It was very imperative for us that we make sure these policy recommendations are enabling policies, especially for the private sector. The private sector was very heavily involved in this discussion and this development of the framework. Transport is very tricky for us. It's very different from dealing with the utility or the power sector, because the private sector is very the key enablers or the key driving force behind in this transition, from my experience or what we discussed in this. So, let's say, for example, introducing fee-based into the policy, because it's the most viable option that we have as the government policy makers for this. But again, it takes me back to my point of enhancing the coordination between us and the transport division, because some mandates it falls within the other ministry's mandate, and that those discussions needs to happen on a more daily basis or more weekly basis in order for it to happen to implement. So, kind of from my perspective, as long as the policies are enabling policies, but it's getting those policies to be implemented. That's the tricky part. So it really needs some cooperation and some coordination between the ministry responsible for energy and the ministry responsible for transport. And I think that would be my last point, moderator. I would have to apologize. I have to go get my plane before I miss it. Sorry.
No, thank you so much, Elia. That was wonderful that you could participate. Please, a big hand for Mr. Elia. Have a safe journey back home. Thank you so much for this wonderful discussion. I guess what it comes back to again, and maybe UNFCCC colleagues are here, because in the earlier session when we were having discussion, there was also a point that Ministry of Transport doesn't get invited to the COPs. So the point comes back that what is required, the solutions are much more kind of cross-cutting across different ministries. It cannot be worked at one ministry level. There needs to be much more integration, and that comes in even more important because it's not just the ministries, but there has to be participation of private sector in it, as they are the ones who are going to be taking, their decisions of investment get affected. So what I will do is, since we have some time, I would like to open it up to the audience. Is it 3:30? We have 20 minutes. Okay, sorry. I thought we had 20 minutes that we do have. But I would invite the audience here to both, one, share their experience or any useful input into this process, or if you have questions to our panelists here, please go ahead. If I may request that when you're asking your question, if you could please come up to one of the two mics and also introduce yourself in terms of name, your country, and which organization you come from. That will be very helpful.
Hello, my name is Daryl. I'm from Malaysia. I'd like to ask the representative from DHL with regards to the sustainable aviation fuel that they're using. So, is there potential to scale up on truly sustainable feedstock that supplies the world's aviation? And what feedstock are you using for sustainable aviation fuel?
I'll answer first the second part. So we collaborated with energy companies such as BP and Energy Global to deliver these sustainable aviation fuels. And this is the business that also, it's in regards to the aviation business that is also part of the emission trading system. You might be aware that in European Union, aviation falls under the emission trading system. So because we also operate our plants, we're part of that system as well. We have two corporate policies, and these distinct the outcomes from them. One is a low carbon fuel policy, where majority of the fuels, such as biofuels, would fall under. So these are the fuels that would deliver some greenhouse gas reduction, say 50% max. There is another policy within our operation, which is a sustainable fuel policy. And this sustainable fuel policy, if we want to claim anything under it, we need to deliver minimum 60% of the greenhouse gas reduction in comparison to the fossil fuel that we phased out from the operations. So the question is which of these fuels could deliver minimum 60% of the fuel reduction. We think one of them is hydrogen when it comes to road transportation. This is what I primarily operate with, because I come from the supply chain, so we operate road transportation, right? For us, significant greenhouse gas reduction would be through hydrogen, which then would be using either green methanol or green ammonia to be converted via fuel cells into electricity that would power then our trucks. So when it comes to sustainable fuels, we take the entire life cycle into consideration when it comes to greenhouse gas emissions. And therefore, we also need to validate that and audit to confirm that this is in compliance with the policy that we are claiming it from. And then you may be aware that companies in EU are heavily audited on the carbon footprints as well. So this would be the case for us. For the road transportation, we are considering more methanol as a feedstock. I must be honest and say that I'm not aware of the feedstock for the aviation fuel, but it replaced 30% of our total aviation fuel, 30% of our needs. If you want, I can come back to you offline with the exact feedstock and where does that feedstock is coming from. But the point here is that when considering sustainable fuels, we are considering the entire life cycle from the feedstock transportation all the way to the usage of it. And, you know, multinational companies such as us, we have to report also well-to-wheel emissions, not just tank-to-wheel emission. And well-to-wheel emission are then considering the entire cycle of the product itself. So it's very comprehensive and detailed, you know, screening that we must do before applying something. This is also because we, as a company, you know, we operate in 200 countries. We employ 500,000 people. We are 11th biggest private employer in the world, and we do feel a huge responsibility to leading the sustainability in logistics. And a lot of things that we are doing, we are actually pioneering it, and could serve to other logistic companies as an example on how really shape good strategies and have them operationally executed on the ground activities. We invite everybody who wants to join this green journey to join us on it, because we also pay a lot of attention on how we build capacities among our subcontractors and the vendors that we are working with. So this is a big portion of our contribution to the society as well, on how we believe that the leadership should look like.
Thank you, Yelena. I think we have one more question, and we have a person here. Please go ahead, sir.
Right. Good afternoon. My name is Daniel. I'm from ACCA, the Association of Chartered Certified Accountants. I'm the Public Affairs Manager there. My question is for Mr. Hasro Rosli from Prasarana. In terms of meeting the goals of the Paris Agreement, what do you think could be the areas of collaboration between public transport providers and accountants? I would like to hear your thoughts on that. Thank you.
This is not something that I'm quite familiar with. So you're asking about what collaboration that we can do between public transportation sector and accountants, right? I think in terms of aspects of financing so far, we are currently we have these so-called options of green financing that is clearly available in the market. And secondly, we do have these exposures to pressures from our stakeholders in terms of our meeting our own climate change targets. So that is pretty much require us to do a lot of things in terms of our data, in terms of our carbon reportings, and perhaps the opportunities as well to have carbon credit creations. That is something else as well that Prasarana is looking into. So I don't have, maybe I'm not addressing your question directly because we don't have exact collaborations with the Accountant Association so far. Perhaps that this is something that we can take offline and we can have more detailed discussion about this. All right, thank you.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Mr. Hasrol. Sorry, we are running short of time. So first of all, may I request you all to put your hand together to thank our panelists for their insights and their thoughts. Thank you so much. Thanks a lot for coming by. And may I now request my colleague Vaishal to please come over and relieve me of my duties and summarize the key thoughts that came through this session.
With us for a few more minutes. So I'm just going to quickly summarize the excellent contributions that our distinguished panelists have shared with us over the past hour or so. So I think there are four main key points that have been discussed and brought up by various individuals, by various panelists. And we've heard a lot about infrastructure. So the lack of infrastructure, the lack of well-designed infrastructure, and financing infrastructure. So it's not just good enough to find funding for the appropriate infrastructure that we need, but we also need to make sure that they are well designed and will fit the purpose of the needs of cities and residents. And the second point that was brought up was on behavior. How can we change behavior? What kind of policies would need to be implemented to shift behavior to a more sustainable and low carbon future? So we've also heard some examples of how governments have been trying to do that to influence travel behavior through different policies. I think we've heard about pricing, some of the pricing mechanisms, as well as zoning and land use planning. And so I think this is something that we will definitely continue to explore as we further develop effective measures to reduce CO2 emissions from the transport sector. And the third point is on renewable energy. How can we decouple energy use or emissions from the transport sector? And this key lies within the development of renewable energy. And I thank all the panelists who have shared their insights on this point. This is definitely a very critical point, because without the use of renewable energy, the achievement of the electrification of the sector may not have as great of an impact as we would have liked. The fourth point, which I think is also one of the most important points, is collaboration. So not just collaborating between stakeholder groups, so between the private and public sector, but also how can the transport sector collaborate with other line ministries. So we've heard from Tonga about the collaboration that is required between energy and transport ministries. And so on that note, I would also like to share that for the first time this year at COP28, on the 5th of December, there will be a high-level ministerial event between energy and transport ministers. This is the first time when we're seeing such a synergy, and we do hope that there will be some positive outcomes coming out from this high-level dialogue. And I do believe that this event, the outcomes of this event could pave the way for stronger collaboration and partnerships between energy and transport stakeholders. And so these are the key few points that have been emerged from this discussion, and we will be bringing all these specific points to COP28 with us, together with our colleagues at the UNFCCC and UNEP, and we do hope that we will be able to continue this discussion with many of our stakeholders and our member states, and to also ensure that we will continue to enhance multi-stakeholder collaboration and regional collaboration. And so before I close this session, I also just want to share that regional cooperation, a stronger regional cooperation in Asia and the Pacific will not just help countries identify their national goals and priorities, it could also achieve progress in the global action process, because of the sheer size and the significance of our region here in Asia and Pacific. We could actually play a bigger role in influencing global action. And so this is why it is critical to link many of our regional dialogues with the global discourse on transport and climate change. And I do thank the UNFCCC for giving us this opportunity, and to also link our regional discourse with global action. So thank you very much, and I wish you all a very wonderful rest of the week in Johor Bahru.